what happens to our conscious experience in the absence of linear time. In the torn pages of Dr. Catherine Halsey's journal, there is a secret hidden in plain sight that only takes a superficial scratch beneath the surface to uncover something wholly unsettling about how tenuous the human experience is. Finding and reading these torn out pages reveals that time itself has stopped agreeing with her. She loses hours, not to unconsciousness, but to absence. She remembers events before they happen. She performs actions she does not recall performing. She becomes, briefly, a mind operating outside a single causal order. This isn't time travel. It's not prophecy, and it's not madness. It is what happens when consciousness survives, but causality does not. And I'd like to talk about what that actually means. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Lounge, a space for curiosity, clarity, and quiet thought. So to jump into this subject, the torn out pages from Halsey's journal hide a secret experiment with trying to place an AI seed into a slipspace field to see what effects the 11 dimensions of slipstream space, hyperdimensionality, and causality have on an AI. But during the experiment, likely due to her physical proximity to an unshielded slipspace rift, Dr. Halsey experiences something particularly unpleasant that I believe nods to a deeper property of our conscious, lived experience. The excerpts regarding the breaks in causality will follow, as read by Kat Peterson as Dr. Halsey.
My removal of the shields induced a peculiar synesthetic effect that crawled, appeared, scented along my left arm up to my neck. I also experienced a kind of hiccup in my awareness, likely generated by the delta time that can occur with abrupt transitions into slipspace. Time seems to have mysteriously elapsed, though I'm uncertain. There is a step anomaly in the chronometer. This may be a technical artifact or a subdimensional leakage as the probe was inserted. No effect on me personally, nor on my wristwatch. I just reread this entry and discovered that I had already documented this temporal disruption. Yet, I have no memory of doing so.
So it's strikingly obvious that Dr. Halsey's lived experience during this experiment is at odds with causality, and the more I thought on it, the more questions that arose as to the nature of human consciousness and its conditional operation within the boundaries of normal space-time, and what would hypothetically happen to the conscious experience outside of the linear flow of time. But before we dive into slipspace, halo, physics, philosophy, and science fiction, we need to establish something immediate. Consciousness is not just awareness, it is ordered awareness. Every serious model of consciousness, neurological or computational, depends on three things. Causality. Cause precedes effect. Neurons fire because other neurons fired. Without causality, neurons would not fire in response to each other, but instead fire randomly, making it impossible to strengthen neural connections, encode information, or otherwise interpret signals meaningfully. Temporal ordering. Moments follow one another. Thoughts arise because prior states existed. Neurons fire one after another, sequentially. That cascade of electrochemical potential within the brain in an ordered manner is what gives rise to thought. A single neuron firing on its own cannot be defined as being a thought. It is the relationship between neurons in an ordered cascade, firing in patterns that give rise to thought. Without temporal ordering, neurons wouldn't fire in a cascade order. Isolated firing of neurons without ordered patterns emerging cannot give rise to thought. Memory integration. The present references the immediate past. Consciousness is only ever aware of the present moment, but can save a previous moment by encoding them through a dynamic, complex process utilizing sensory input and internal states and retaining them over time, with recall being the very similar impulses that happened at the moment the memory was formed, firing again within the brain. These encoded memories give the individual a sense of self and identity, a sensation of being a fixed entity across time. Identity persists because yesterday leads to today. Break any one of these, and consciousness degrades. Break causality itself, and consciousness does not malfunction, it loses its scaffolding. But it's not just as simple as asking what happens to conscious experience when time becomes non-linear. The question itself goes to the edge of physics, neuroscience, and philosophy, because the answer is, we don't actually know what consciousness is, so asking what happens to it when causality breaks is like asking what happens to a shadow when the light source fractures into multiple instances. In reality, there are no currently known phenomena that would allow a lived conscious experience to interact or overlap with non-linear time, or exist outside of causality. The only methods that are close to this would be travelling at the speed of light, which we know is impossible in the 4 dimensions of space-time for anything with mass. While you may argue consciousness has no mass, that would suggest it can exist independently from the body or the brain, which, at least at the moment, we have no hard evidence for. But we can reason about it, and Halo's answer is quietly one of the least absurd ones in science fiction. But in order to understand her conscious experience, we need to understand the environment within which she experienced it. Dr. Holsey was in very close proximity to a functioning slipspace drive. A fully engaged slipspace drive encloses a ship within a stabilized bubble of space-time. Inside that bubble, causality is preserved. But Holsey is not inside. She is near an active slipspace drive, outside of its fully stabilized metric, exposed to space-time shear and causal turbulence. This places her in the most dangerous of locales. Local physics still holds, but global ordering does not. Her brain continues to function, neurons still fire, thoughts still form, but which thought comes first is no longer guaranteed, as the temporal disturbances alter the standard linear flow of time into simultaneous, non-linear delta time. The higher dimensions of slipstream space are a causality-hostile medium. The conscious experience of a person hasn't evolved to understand causality-hostile mediums. It simply understands 3 spatial dimensions and the understanding of how those spatial dimensions exist across a series of causal slices, or moments in time, and an awareness of itself within that matrix. So when separated from the normal and expected flow of causality, the brain does what it always does. It continues, but the story it tells itself, the continuity of its internal narrative, begins to fracture. A causality-hostile region doesn't necessarily mean total chaos. It can mean that event order is frame-dependent. Local causality exists, but global causality does not. Feedback loops occur without paradox resolution, or even time-like curves fold or branch. This is important because local causality can survive even when global causality fails. In Halo, the slipspace bubble preserves classical space-time locally, maintains ordered physics inside, and shields matter and cognition. This is not incidental. If the bubble failed, even briefly, neural activity would desynchronize, electrochemical gradients would decohere, and memory encoding would fracture. From the subject's perspective, this would not feel like confusion, it would feel like instantaneous unconsciousness or death with no subjective duration. There is no experience without temporal continuity. This detail is easy to overlook, but impossible to dismiss. The writing exists, it's in her handwriting, it matches her intent, it is contextually correct, which means she did write it, just not on the same causal slice she remembers. Her consciousness briefly ceases to be bound to a single world line, not split, not duplicated, unanchored. She is sampling multiple valid orderings of the same events, and memory can only keep one. The rest are lost, not erased, just simply unreachable. What's striking about Holsey's journal is what isn't there. She doesn't report hallucinations, delusions, loss of self, emotional instability. Instead, she reports temporal desynchronization, memory without sequence, action without recall, awareness without now. This matters because mental illness still requires time. Psychosis unfolds, confusion progresses, madness has a direction. Holsey's experience does not. Her mind is intact. It's the timeline that is not. So what is consciousness, and what is it in the absence of the normal flow of time? Well, if causality is partially disrupted but not fully annihilated, you could get temporal smearing. Thoughts overlap, memories could form without order, and awareness could exist without sequence. This wouldn't feel like time travel, it would feel like remembering something before realizing you thought it. If a neural process feeds back into its own causal past, thoughts repeat, intent collapses into fixation, and agency erodes. This resembles extreme forms of temporal lobe epilepsy, dissociative looping, and even certain psychedelic states. If different causal branches interact, multiple internal selves form. Each experience a consistent story, none can reconcile with the others. From the outside, the person appears functional, but from the inside, identity fractures. There are hypotheses in quantum mechanics that posit that consciousness, as well as many other physical properties of the universe, may in fact be emergent properties, rather than fundamental. In physics, when something is described as fundamental, this means it is a basic underlying component or principle that forms the foundation of a system. Emergence instead describes new complex properties that arise from the interactions of simpler parts. This is where we leave Halo and step into true speculation. If consciousness were non-local, field-based, or emergent across higher dimensions, then perhaps a form of awareness could exist without linear time. A conscious experience in simultaneous time would feel less like moving through life and more like being the entire shape of it all at once. There would be no single now, no clear boundary between memory and anticipation. Past, present, and future would all be directly apprehended together. Choice would still feel real from within, but every decision and its outcome would already be known as a part of a fixed, self-consistent pattern. Emotion would deepen and darken. Love would be profound yet inseparable from loss. Fear would shift from anticipation to existential weight, and meaning would intensify because nothing could ever truly pass or be forgotten. Identity itself would cease to be a story unfolding in time and instead become a four-dimensional structure, an entire life experienced not sequentially, but all at once. Sounds a little bit like what people describe at the moment you die, with your whole life flashing before your eyes, which, when taken with ideas of a field-based, emergent consciousness, raises the question about the nature of death and the possible persistence of consciousness beyond physical death and outside of the boundaries of linear time. But that, I think, is a conversation for another time. And that about rounds up what I wanted to tackle today. I have several videos planned that take concepts and ideas from Halo and extrapolate them out into these kinds of discussions. I thought it would be a good way to bring my established audience over at Installation 00 over to this new channel and give something familiar but introduce you to the new format and method of delivery. Conversation will not always remain Halo-based, but evolve over time into things far beyond anything I've put online before. If you enjoyed this discussion and want to see more, I'd really appreciate a subscribe. Liking and commenting are always welcome, and I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, and until next time.